Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Onyx Path Twitch for OPPCon 2024. I am Travis Legg. My pronouns are he and they, and it is my extreme pleasure to be hosting the community content panel. We do these every year. I love it. It's one of my favorite times of the convention because we get to talk about the ways that yourselves and ourselves, all members of these communities, can create material for Canis Minor, which addresses the realms of Pugmire, Storypath Nexus, which addresses our various Storypath systems, and the Sluritian Vault, which deals with Scarredlands. I have a illustrious panel of wonderful folks here to help me along the way. And let's go ahead and have you each introduce yourselves. We'll kick it off. If you could, Mike, please tell us who you are, what you do, your pronouns, and anything special you'd like to promote or share with the folks at home.
Well, I'm Mike Cheney. I'm the art director slash layout person, production messiah, whatever you want to call it. And my pronouns are he, him. And what am I something I'm trying to promote?
Yeah,
Well, besides that Curseborn ash can,
there you go. Yeah, let's talk
there's
about that.
there's also of course the what was it? Contagion Chronicles RMCs, which I'm also very much hoping that everyone will pick up.
Excellent. Yeah, those came out as well. There's been a lot of noise about the Curseborn Ashcan, rightfully so, I would say, this weekend. But do not forget, we had a double dose of Chronicles of Darkness on Wednesday because Clade's Companion POD went up as well. Is that
Oh, I
correct?
forgot about that one.
Yeah, so twice as nice for the Chronicles of Darkness fans. We want to make sure we're making everybody as happy as we can around these parts, you know? So make sure that while you're grabbing the Curseborn Ash Can, which I have just pinned in the chat, you also swing by and pick up the Contagion Chronicle RMCs and the Clade's Companion. While speaking of awesome people whose work we should pick up, Alon, please, if you would, tell us who you are, what you do, your pronouns, and anything you would care to promote.
Hi, so yeah, I'm Alain Jola. My pronouns are he, him. I did a lot of work on the Slation Vault, as well as a couple of pieces for Canis Minor and Storypath Nexus. And I think that a lot of it is on sale on Ross right now. Uh, if you want to grab something specifically, go get any Vigil Watch books on the Slation Vault, either mine or Sarah's and Fran on the World Ones, or even Jeremy's on the Minotaurs. They are all fantastic books for the Skylands.
Awesome, rock and roll. I've thrown the link to all your books right there in the chat. And if you could either turn up your mic or get a little closer to it, maybe you're coming in a little on the quiet side of the line. I appreciate it. And last but not least, of course, Jess, always a pleasure to have you. Mother Manticora, thank you for being here. Please tell us who you are, what you do, your pronouns, and anything you would care to promote.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Jess. My pronouns are they, them. I am a writer and editor for Onyx Path stuff, related stuff. I've mostly been a writer. You can find all my stuff on my website, writejess.com. But the main thing that I want to talk about, which is the reason Travis calls me Mother Manticora, my favorite thing I've worked on for the Scarred Lands was Dead Man's Rest. It was a wonderful project. I had so much fun doing it. I did a lot of work on the Manticore for that one. Definitely pick that up if you haven't yet. I still talk about that one to people all the time.
Well, I deeply appreciate that and I'm very touched by it. And I know that a lot of the folks that worked on Dead Man's Rust, we all have a deep, abiding love of that particular book. And it's funny you mentioned because right now, as we do every year, we are running a deal. We have a anniversary sale over at Indie Press Revolution. And right now, you can get copies of Dead Man's Rust, the beautiful, traditionally printed copies, for 50% off over at IPR. So I'm going to throw that link in the chat as well. Thank you all panelists for being here so much. What we're going to do is we're going to dive into a couple of like our own topics a little bit here, and then we're going to open the floor for questions. So If you have any questions, please make sure you type them in the chat with question, all caps. It doesn't hurt to spend chips of Onyx to highlight those questions as well. We will try to make sure we get to all of them, but there are a couple topics that I know we wanted to touch on a little bit. And to start things off, I suppose, let's go with Mike, if you could. Please, you had wanted to dive into a little bit. You're our graphics guru. You're the person who I would say is most directly responsible for the way that our books look.
I make the pictures go.
Yeah, you make pictures go vroom. How would you? What advice would you have, or what would you like to say to somebody who's coming in new to make some community content? What sort of tips would you like to give them, and what sort of guidelines would you like to sort of lay out in terms of approaching the visual aspect of it?
Oh, well, for one, like I said, we do all of our templates in InDesign. And usually we put up like an IDML file. But I also know a lot of people, don't particularly care for Adobe stuff. And I'm trying to work on that, basically trying to learn a couple other programs, but don't know if that's gonna, anytime soon coming on that. I'll put it that way.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's one of the things that the community content creators maybe don't know is that we always put out InDesign files because that's what we work in. Sometimes we're fortunate enough that somebody is able to put together a Word file for us, but that's not always the case. And I assure you, Mike does not do any layout in Word.
no, not since 1992.
But sorry, please continue. I just want to make sure I made that point.
But one of the things everybody should always think about is the freebie thing. Out there on the internet, if you go to places like Creative Markets, some other places of the similar style, basically where you can buy graphic design elements, you can also get freebies every week. Up to 6 different freebies. You can get free fonts, free vector graphics. If you get that kind of stuff, I highly recommend it because it becomes invaluable. It will allow you to take the format that is already established and allow you to actually, kind of expound upon it, add your own little spin to it. You want to make fake documents and artifacts. Those things are great for that sort of thing.
100%. Yeah. And also, another thing that just as you're talking that came into mind is if you happen to be a user who's familiar with, like, say, Affinity and InDesign, there's nothing saying you can't port over and say, I'm going to make a Affinity template and put it up, pay what you want, or I'm going to make a Word
Yeah.
template. Like, you can do those things if we don't have the time, resources, access to get to them. So that's another thing that I think is important to bring up on the graphics side. Did you have any other general graphics do's, don'ts, faux pas, warnings?
The only big do's, don'ts, or whatever is basically the use of AI images. As a former retired artist from eons ago, back in the White Wolf days, if you're using AI art, it's stealing. You might as well be basically tracing over, a Jim Lee comic book cover at that point and posting as your own.
100% agree. 100% agree.
I mean, swipers are called out constantly in the art world, and AI still needs to be called out every time.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe one day, in a bright, shiny world, we'll live in a place that has ethical AI. But we don't live in that world.
Well, to be fair, like with the Adobe thing, if they basically paid a licensing fee for everything that they use, like if it's only restricted to Adobe stock,
right,
and they're scraping that for AI, I have no problem with that. You own it, you can scrape whatever you want. The big problem is basically they've come up with where they found pieces of other artists who have not consented to this inside AI generated art.
right. Yeah, and it's no different than copy pasting and doing a little sketch on top of it yourself. That's still stealing. So yeah, none of that. Well, thank you very much for that, Mike. And again, I would encourage anyone in the comments if you have any questions for layout graphics. Mike's the guy to ask. So while we've got him here, be sure to ask him. Um, while we're waiting for any questions that might roll in, however, alone, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you've done in the community content space. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. The vast majority of what you've done has been Solution Vault. You sort of dove over into doing some Canis Minor stuff, but you really only got involved with the StoryPath Nexus. Did you do anything prior to the game jam, or was that your?
Yes, I did just one small piece. It's a monster for They Came From Beyond the Grave.
Gotcha. Okay.
But otherwise, yes, the game jam was my first foray into the StoryPath system.
And
And
go ahead.
and really for me, I mean, it was an exercise more than anything, because so I wasn't familiar with StoryPath Nexus, with Trinity Continuum, and I didn't have the layout file ready. So it was very good for me to try in a small amount of time and make a supplement that is in the um, mindset and the design philosophy of the StoryPath Nexus and respects the lore and so forth. So it was quite a tough exercise actually, but I think it was good to explore a little bit other systems than the D20 systems.
For sure. And I mean, even within the span of D20, right? Because Canis Minor and Solution Vault, you're both dealing with D20 based systems. Canis Minor's system is obviously a little different, but at the end of the day, still running on the same engine, at least at this point. Um, I think that the game jams provide a really cool motivation, I guess I would say, for folks to get out there and try something they haven't tried before, try a new system that they haven't tried before. But you also don't need to wait for an event like that. You can give yourself like, hey, I'm going to take this. I'm going to take 7 days, and I'm going to crack something out for this. It's going to have to be 4 pages or less, and boom, you can set yourself those sort of parameters, I think, as a good motivational tool as well. Did you find any difficulties other than the actual mechanics of the systems and learning those in navigating the differences between the programs?
Um, the biggest difficulty for me was to immerse myself into the Trinity lore because it's a very dense setting and I didn't know where to start on that side. But fortunately, I think it's Awkward GM Corbin who made a 15 minutes video on introduce the setting, kind of beginner's guide. I think he did that for a different game line, and that was very useful for me to get the first ideas and also to know what to look and where to look further information that I needed.
That's awesome. Yeah, and those resources, there's a lot of creators in the community who are doing, their own Twitch streams or YouTube videos or things like that, where they break down these for you in simple terms as an assistive tool, which I think is very neat as well. Turning our attention over to you, Jess. I know you've worked on Canis Minor stuff. And have you done any? You've done some work on the Solution Vault too. Yeah, we've worked together on the Vengeance of the Shun. What experiences have you had working in the community content space? Because I know you've also worked on ample stuff outside of our community content. What experiences have you had, and what I guess would you offer advice wise in terms of somebody who's new coming in, about to get started? They encounter, say they like Pugmire, they want to make a Pugmire adventure using Canis Minor. What advice, if any, would you have for them?
I think the thing that was the most helpful for me, especially when I started out with Canis Minor, because I think before I had written for it, I hadn't even heard of it before you presented it to me. And one of the first things I did was played a one shot with you. And that was such a huge help in getting me into the system itself and getting me into like the lore and the story and everything, getting used to the different like kinds of character types and all of that. Definitely, I feel like that's a good recommendation for anything that you want to write for, is make sure that you've played for it before, because that it's night and day, the difference, like being able to understand the actual gameplay. But then also I've been very fortunate with, I think, all of the community content that I've done. I've worked with you specifically, Travis, and you always have like great resources that you provide. Lots of like work already in that system that you send out to use as reference. And that has always made such a huge difference for me, being able to reference other stuff that's already out there, to be able to see what people have already made for it, and just be able to have that context for what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, and I would definitely advise people, if you're getting into a new system, something that runs, maybe especially if it runs parallel to, but is different from, like Canis Minor is an interesting place because the first edition Pugmire is OGL based, but is just different enough to get you really tripped up. Um, so
It definitely is, yeah.
I would recommend, getting that one shot in, getting some people together to play, and play test your material as well if you can. I know Scarred Lands is a bit of a easier for Sluratian Vault is a bit of an easier leap for folks that are used to working in the D&D space. Though there are some considerations there too. But
It is a lot easier, and I will say the first adventure that I wrote for Scarred Lands, I actually hadn't played Scarred Lands before I wrote that. I'd played a ton of D&D, and I'd written for D&D stuff before. And so when I wrote that one, it was, in some ways, it was easier because it was very similar in a lot of ways, but there were also things that after I had written that, and then I think like during the editing process at some point, I was able to play a one shot in Scarred Lands, and it was a very obvious click for me of like, oh, there are the things that I was kind of struggling with,
sure.
like I didn't necessarily think about, because it felt so similar to D&D in a lot of ways, but being able to play it definitely made that difference. And like although you are right that it is a lot more similar to something like D&D, being able to play it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it helps you plug into the feel and the vibe, if nothing else.
Yeah.
All right. Again, just a reminder, if you're in the chat and you have some questions about community content or about any of the stuff that we've worked on specifically, we're here. We got some time to kill. Happy to do so. A couple of general pieces of advice I would like to just remind folks of. Whether it's your first community content program or your 400th, please make sure you're checking the FAQs, the guidelines. Make sure that you are appropriately putting the right logos on the covers of your books. I know we have to routinely do sweeps on the Storypath Nexus to remind people that you got to take this down until you, until you get a logo on the front of it. So make sure that you're following those guidelines. And also make sure that we provide in the templates, we have a place for the boilerplate legal text, but you want to be sure that you're using the appropriate text for the program you're working with, and that you're appropriately putting in a copyright date and crediting yourself. There have been a number of times in the past where I've cracked open a community content program from various programs. This is not a problem that is unique to Onyx Paths programs. But you crack it open and it says, copyright date this year in brackets, and by, and then your name in brackets, like in this finished book. So that's an easy oversight to make. Try to avoid doing that in the future. Another thing I want to talk about real quick are collaborations. Both of you have been involved with and spearheaded collaborations in community content spaces. Is that fair and accurate to say?
Yes.
Alon, why don't you talk to me a little bit about the collaborative side of that, of entering in as a project manager effectively for a community content.
Sure. So I do this collaborative project roughly once a year. So currently I have actually one that is going on right now. And these projects, they are like potlucks in a way, in the sense that anyone who wants to join the project can and can bring their own elements. So these are collections. So we did a collection of NPCs, we did a collection of ships, of warlock patrons. Now we are doing some monsters. So if you want to write some monsters for the Scarlands, hit me in Discord and we can invite you into this project. So we allocate quite a bit of time for those projects, so you can work when you want, at the pace as you want, and you can accommodate other projects or your personal life or whatever. We have a fixed deadline, but it's in enough time for you to write what you want to do.
Absolutely.
And we'll have someone take care of the editing and take care of the layout, so that we'll have the tone that will be consistent throughout the entire project. And you don't have to take care of the layout, which is for some people quite a pain in the ass.
Sure, yeah.
And as well, we can provide guidance. For example, in the current project, we have some people who are not very familiar with 5e, so we can help them with the mechanics side of things. Or if we have some people who are not maybe familiar with the Scarlands, we can help them so that their monster fits really the theme of the setting.
Awesome. And you're actively involved on the Onyx Path Discord.
Yeah.
As well, having discussions with that. So in the Onyx Path Discord, we have channels for each of our game lines, but we also have channels for our community content projects, for our community content avenues, I guess I would say, or labels. So you can go in there, you can hop into the Solarian Vault channel and say, hey, Alan, I heard you talking about it. I would like to work on your book, and then connect that way.
Yes.
I would also like to kind of pose the same question to you, Jess. If you could run down for us your experiences in working in collaboration as opposed to working individually on community content.
Sure. A lot of the collaborative projects that I have experience on were when I was an editor. And those I think are approached a lot differently than being like the project manager versus a writer versus an editor. Part of it though is that there were occasions where I was sort of an editor and like co-project manager. If you want to get into something like that, definitely the hardest part would be deadlines. That is a heavy conversation for any kind of project, period. But also having to strike that balance between being very like understanding when like stuff comes up. Sometimes people are going to miss deadlines, and also just like having a deadline that you're trying to get everything done by. That can be very, very difficult. In terms of editing, though, that's sort of like where my bigger perspective comes in. Um, Editing, I think, takes a lot more time than some people realize, because it's not the same as writing. It's a very different animal than writing is, and sometimes people think, oh, like once you've got written, it'll take like a day or two to edit it, and that's simply not true. So if you are doing like your big collaborative project and you're looking for an editor, that's something to keep in mind is that editing can take a lot of time, and it can be very finicky, especially because I think everyone sort of addressed this at some point, that there are all these different people who do these different aspects of it. Like you have your layout designer, you have your writers, you have your editors, and they're going to be looking for some very specific things to make sure that it matches all of the aspects of the project that you're working within. So editors for like the Solution Vault will be looking for different things than editors for Canis Minor will be looking for different things than editors for like D&D, all of that. So that's just something that I like to remind people of when they're talking about community projects is just like what a big commitment, like time commitment and like effort it is to like find an editor and then making sure that you're understanding what you're asking them to do and what you're going to need from them.
Well, and I think that's brilliant insight and brings up several good points. One is, if at all possible, work with an editor. If it's
Always, yes.
Yeah, if it's not possible to work with an editor for whatever reason, take some time. My advice would be take some time. You write your project, take a week or two from it, come at it with fresh eyes, read it out loud, because if it sounds wrong to you, it's probably wrong. You'll hear things that you will not see on a page. Um, yeah, and I'm a big proponent of, like, I think it's great that our projects allow you, within a few boundaries to kind of do what you want and be creative. You can play with some elements. You can put up some very basic things as well, and that's fine. And if all you want to do is, I made this basic thing and I want to share it with people, I don't care about it, being a commercial success or anything along those lines. You can put up something that's relatively basic and straightforward. But you also can say, no, I want to monetize this. I want to bring it in line with, try to be on par with what's being produced in the official lines. And I guess to bring it around to Mike, would you have any advice, or I guess how would you structure your advice to people that are trying to engage at various levels? So, what would you say to somebody who's like, I want to make sure I'm putting out a commercial project that people are gonna, run out, flock by, and versus, would you give different advice, and if so, what would it be to somebody who's like, nah, I just want to put this, homebrew NPC up and see if people can use it?
That's actually a pretty good question. One thing I've always, in my own personal projects way back in the day when I used to do this kind of thing for fun, was basically just shoot for the most, I don't know if you call it the most professional presentation, but make it look as much like the rule book as humanly possible if you have those kind of assets. Or if you are doing something like your own thing, to kind of give it spit and polish, really, you know, put time and effort into it and it will pay off.
Absolutely. You can, I would say that one way to do it, especially if maybe you don't have the whiz bang tools, you don't have InDesign, but you can maybe get into Word and move some pictures around or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Looking at existing material for reference, checking your work can I think make a load of difference, and take some time, but not an inordinate amount of time, right?
I mean, my first band project I did back in the day was a GURPS book that we laid out in like Word 92 or something like that. And then my scanner was a kind you would have to put the art down flat and then roll it
Oh
across
wow.
the art.
Oh, it's getting old school. I did see a question I want to bring up, and I don't know, Mike, even if you would be remotely more knowledgeable about this than I would, but the question in the chat was, um, if the StoryPath Ultra games will be unlocked for StoryPath Nexus. Uh, that's, in my estimation, that's getting our cart way before several horses. Those books are going to need to come out first, and we just don't have that knowledge right now.
Yeah, I would basically say you'd probably hear something more about it probably after World Below hits.
Yeah, and I would say if past is prologue, what we generally do is try to release new content for the StoryPath Nexus when that book is available via retail, as opposed to just through DriveThruRPG, right? When that book is in stores, that's
Yep.
when we're looking at doing our unlocks. So just because you see something pop up on DriveThruRPG, if you know, hey, that's a line that's been kickstarted, that's going to be going out into stores, you can probably, deduce from that, if you don't hear otherwise, that you will not hear much about community content unlocks until at least it is in the store. And there's a number of reasons for that, but the real basic one is, we have plans for what we want to release, and we don't necessarily want those plans to get run over by community content releases before the books is even out in people's hands. Do you have anything to add to that, Mike, or is that pretty well covered that?
That's pretty much everything. Like I said, I mean, said, we'll have, and with things going closer to schedule than they have been in the last couple of years, you know, won't be too big of a delay between the time it hits one and then it hits stores. So
Well, and that's another thing, too, is that sometimes we discussed this a little bit in the distribution panel last night, but we are still, as a planet, but especially as an industry, reeling from the effects of the pandemic. It is still a daily problem. It is still having effects on getting books. It has having effects on getting supplies. It is having effects on shipping. It's still a thing that is ongoing. As a result of some of the strangeness of that and the way that we've had to readjust and reconfigure things, sometimes that also winds up with things happening in bursts as opposed to a predictable rhythm. Just as an example, we recently unlocked Assassins and Adventure basically back to back. It might have been the same week if I recall properly, and that was just because the timing of that worked out that way. you know,
Yeah.
it's and there's a lot of factors outside of our control that go into that. If the audience has any more questions, feel free to fire them off. Otherwise, I'm going to dive into a couple of more kind of anecdotal things from our panelists. So, if you could tell me, you have done some supplements that for Sluritian Vault that were set in Gilsped. You've done some that were set in Fenrilik.
Yep.
And you did one that particularly I found interesting. Forgive me if I'm murdering the pronunciation, the Velmatia book.
Yes.
Can you get into that a little bit and how that works and how that works within the guidelines of what the Sluritian Vault offers? Because if I recall properly, when you were putting that book together, there were some conversations about making sure that you weren't coloring outside the lines, as it were, right?
Yeah. So that book covers the city-state of Valmecia, which is set in Gilspad, but most of it relates to the past of the Scarlands. So not the epoch or the period at which, for example, Dead Man Rust or the Standard Scarlands campaign occurs, but centuries or even millennia before that. And it gives you tools to play in these different periods, notably in terms of differences of what classes are present and available for the players, or what are the effects of simply the Titans still being there in the world and not being defeated. So there are some indications on how to use these elements in modern day Gitpad, but I feel that the most use of that book is to play before in different time period. If you want to play with that. Yeah.
And it was, I just want to say it's a very high quality product. And it reminded me, as I mentioned, I think a little bit at the top of the show, I might have forgot to mention at the top of the show, but when we did the Assassins Unlock, I did project management for a book called Bloody Burrows, which is what we've kind of, I guess, around the office unofficially called this a tentpole, right? A community content tentpole. In the case of Bloody Burrows, it is for Trinity Continuum Assassins. It is set in New York City, and it is effectively a guide to playing Assassins in New York. It's got some new player options in it. It's got some ready-made black boxes in it. It's all good to go, but it's also designed in such a way so as to be hooks that other community content creators can then pick up and make their supplements that complement that are drawn from the material in that as well as the material in Assassins. It uses the sort of communal pool idea of community content as a stepladder to for other creators to build on, and I think Dalmatia does a great job of that too. And that was not done. Like I said, I believe if I recall properly, you had some conversations about what can I do without violating
Yeah,
the rules. But other than that, there was no involvement from the Onyx Pass side on it. That was just done
yeah,
by you and Sarah, right? And
yeah.
Megan.
Sarah was a law advisor on that one, uh, and the editor as well. And the idea was to not describe 3 millennia of history very precisely, but just give the main bits so that then people can fill in their own detail as they want. So either game masters or even community content creators. In fact, it's something that I really like about community content is to pick pieces from other creators and introduce them into my own material or my own game simply. And it's kind of a collaborative world building, and it's something that is really satisfying when it's done on such a scale. Because I mean, for example, I used your racklings quite often. I use some stuff that Jeremy has done quite often as well. It all tells same global story, but from different angles, and it's lovely.
Nice. And Jess, you've worked on a tentpole style project as well with Morty Corgi's Scroll of Mysteries. Now, in that, it was much more just like writing as opposed to like project management. But how did you find that experience? Do you have any advice for creators who might be going in as a part of a project like that, or just creators who are considering like, how do I make this thing that other people can hang their stories on, right? Because that was kind of like one of our mission statements with Morty Corgis was we wanted to make stuff we were sure that players would use, but also that other creators could use. So can you elaborate on ideas or tips for that?
I would say the thing that made that the easiest for me to work on, a couple of projects. I don't remember at the time if we were living together, but it was definitely pre-pandemic. And so a friend of mine, Jen Vaughn, who also worked on that book as well as on Dead Man's Rest, at one point we were roommates, and it helped a lot to just have someone that I could go sit at the table with and sort of brainstorm with. And that I think is a big part of what helped me with Morty Corgis and Dead Man's Rest. With Morty Corgis specifically, being able to talk through like I want to make this thing, but if I were going to make it for like an adventure that I were writing, I would approach it differently because I want to make this thing for someone, like say an item, but like it really only has to work within the context of the story that I'm writing. If I'm writing something that I want to make sure people can use it and like build their own things off it, it has to be detailed enough for it to make sense and for people to be able to use it in some meaningful way, but also general enough that they can do something very, very different with it if they decide that they want to. So it really came down to like finding a way to talk through getting that balance with each individual entry of deciding like here's what I want to do with it, but if I try to do that, will it constrain it too much so that when other people do it, they're going to think, "Oh, I can really only approach this in this one way," versus, "Oh, here are the ways that I can sort of like use this to springboard something else from."
Absolutely, yeah. They're different. They're different goals. They're different targets. They're different.
Definitely.
They're in the same like archery range, but they're different targets.
Yeah. And it for me personally, it just helps a lot to talk through that with someone. That's just sort of part of my writing process for like knowing that it's going for a different audience than what I'm used to. Or being, I guess not necessarily a different audience, but just being used differently by that audience. Being able to talk through it with someone was a big part of what helped me. But even that, really, what it came down to was having to think through, like I said, that this is going to be used differently. Like people are going to interact with this differently, ostensibly, ideally, like that was the goal, that they'll interact with it differently than what I'm used to.
Yeah, uh, and I think you handled that fantastically. Obviously, I think both of you handled that fantastically. You're on this panel for one thing, but also just I've had the pleasure of working with you both. I think you've both done a fantastic job at threading that needle in the projects that you've worked on in that capacity. And we do have another question that's come up in the chat I wanted to give a little space to, which is within your experience, what kind of community content is doing best in terms of interest or talking about? And I'm going to take that to mean in terms of getting other community members interested in. But if you have a clarification or a further question, Tom, you can clarify that in the chat. So, Jess, what do you say to that? What kind of community content seems to spark the most conversation from others, or
Ooh,
spark the most
that's
response, I guess?
yeah, that's a tough question. Um, I would say like we were talking about stuff that works as sort of a springboard for other ideas. I feel like tends to be a cause for a lot of conversation. And I think part of that is because it's meant to do that. Basically, you're meant to interact with it in ways that you can kind of use it to create other stuff from. So if that counts towards like what you're talking about in terms of what people will then go on to talk more about, because that's when you're making stuff like that, that's basically designed for people to then go and like create different things with it. Then that sort of like causes those conversations about it to happen, because it's not just a matter of, you buy this the supplement and then you like play it or you introduce it to other people. It's you buy the supplement and then you use it to potentially create more things from it. So I would say something like that, though that might just be my experience with it, that like that I think are the things that, yeah, stuff like that I would say for me personally would be the things that I have then heard other people talk most about.
I would concur with that, but again, I might be a little biased as I've done a lot of things that are really designed to be like, and then take this and create 5 more things from it. So that has poised me to hear that a lot, and you know, uh, have a greater amount of works under my belt that are designed for that express purpose. How about for you, Along? Have you seen anything different in your work, in your experience?
Oh, I would say that what I've seen elect the most discussion is mostly what the world building aspect of the community content, because I mean player options and creature stat blocks, for example, especially for Skylands, since it's a D&D game, you can find it in other places. But the world building is what makes it unique and what makes a supplement memorable. And because then you can go with other people and kind of make hypotheses about how these interact with other elements of the lore and like that. So that's, I think, what's the most interesting to talk about.
Finding those places where the lore you are building intersects with the existing lore, and focusing some energy in that direction. That kind of thing. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm going to put a little spin on this question for you, Mike. And I guess maybe consider it twofold. What, if any, community content stuff catches your eye? And what, if anything, is it that you are specifically looking at or looking for when you're looking through or at community content? Like, what would you want out of it? Kind of thing.
Usually, the first thing I see when I look at the community content is the cover design,
Sure.
and that suckers me in. Like I said, Alan got held his Gelspad Gazetteer looking. Those are awesome.
Thanks.
None of the provided elements, they're built on something and it looks awesome. Cool. Every time one of those up, I at least click and see what it is.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think you can overstate the importance of a good cover.
You can judge a book by its cover, at least. Well, not so much that, but it's basically that's that big marquee thing to draw you in.
Yeah. Well,
My
and
movie
go ahead.
my movies have posters and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. And I bet you, I'm certain there is a very strong community content project out there that is not getting the attention it deserves because it maybe doesn't have the cover that it deserves. You know, I would almost guarantee you that that's the case. I'm sure that there are plenty of professionally published role playing games out there that might not be
Oh,
getting the.
there are tons. There are tons. Like I said, it's all, you know,
Well, and to I guess to expand on that a little bit too, we do provide. We have our cover templates and we have our art and such. But as far as the requirements for all of our programs, as far as I know, if somebody can strike me down in the chat if I'm wrong, all of our programs require you to have the program logo on the cover. Sometimes there's a bit of text it requires you to have on the cover as well, like compatible with Scion or something along those lines. Other than that, though, you can do what you want with the cover, as long as
well, I
you're
mean,
meeting those requirements, right? So
well,
go
what
ahead.
I was going to say is, if you're doing a PDF, I mean, you're not planning to print it or anything. Sky is the limit what you can do.
Mhm.
You want to, take the template and modify it. Maybe you want to, do a different size book, like a like a sign up book, do a 7 by 10 or something like that. That's the whole
Yeah,
point is with it without the whole restriction of printing requirements, you can do all kinds of fun stuff with those things.
yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of stock art providers on drive-through that make like cover templates where you go pop, $4 to another artist and you get a professional looking cover template that then you can add in your personalized piece of art behind it. There's a lot of them where it'll be like, a leatherette with like a circle in it for putting the art in. And these things have been pre-built for you by professional artists that you can get a hold of at a steal. If you just browse through the stock art that's available on
I was going to suggest there's a couple artists on there. Eric Lofgren
Eric Lofgren is amazing. Yeah.
has had his stuff. I swear his stuff's been out there since the early teens, and great guy. And you want to use his art, I'm sure he will appreciate the money he makes from that. So
For sure. And then a lot of it is the lion's share of it's very affordable. And the stuff I would say that's on there that's not what I would necessarily call affordable is because it's really, 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 really high quality. There are very few things up there that are high price and at the same time not so good looking because they're not going to move with those numbers.
and I'm also going to say the thing on a Travis, correct me if I'm wrong, on an Adobe stock, I think they even have gaming and fantasy style artwork now.
Oh yeah, I pull a lot out of Adobe stock, and
I mean,
yeah,
it's not inexpensive, but it's also a great way to go without having, you get
and,
some really nice good stuff.
and what I would recommend doing, and Mike can maybe correct me if I'm wrong with this, but what I would recommend doing when you're going through Adobe stock is you have an actual option in there where you can exclude generative AI.
Mhm.
Because I'm just not sure. Like, I know that broadly speaking, AI is unethical. Adobe has their own thing going on. I'm not sure what the ethics of that are. You know what I mean? So I just when I go through it, I just exclude generative AI, so it's not a concern. But it's very cool that they have offered that option if they're going to be doing that, right? So I got a good question in the chat from Jack. Are there guarantees that stock art with certain programs are not AI generated? So if it's on Drive Through RPG, I don't know that they're allowing new AI art there at all. But if it is on Drive Through RPG, it has to be noted in the product description according to their rules. Adobe, I know, lets you exclude generative AI. Mike, what about other like stock art places?
That's a tough one because I haven't seen any per se, but then again, I haven't exactly been hunting for actual art on a lot of sites.
Fair enough.
More like down artists to do, stuff.
Right. Looking for the people, not the product necessarily.
I
Yeah.
will say then, well, like if you go on ArtStation, they have a specific thing where you can filter out AI art really for specific artists. And what is that new social media thing for artists. I can't remember what it's called.
You talking about story blocks?
Nah, they just started like a Facebook for or like an Instagram for artists.
Oh, Canva, right? Is that it?
Nah, it's something else. Kara.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah.
And if you're, want to look at art that way, there's nothing on there that's AI generated. It's strictly prohibited. But
Yeah.
I
It's
mean,
very much an anti-AI platform. It's kind of like how it got started, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, there are resources out there. You have to do a little bit of due diligence. But most of the places, I mean, I would just recommend, especially if you're just getting started, if you don't see an option for filtering that generative AI art out, don't use anything from there. Or if you don't see a policy that says the AI has to be clearly, you know, uh, marked. Otherwise, it's like dealing with the Fae, count the fingers and the teeth. Um, on that note, we've got about 10 minutes left. If anybody has any final questions, now's the time to get them in the chat. But I would like to just go around the horn, and we'll start with Jess. If you have just kind of like a um, final thought or piece of advice or favorite story or just a final thing you'd like to share with folks that are just starting to get engaged with the creation or the purchase of community content.
Sure. For creation, we talked earlier about editing and how important it is to have an editor, and I definitely stand by that. Always hire an editor if you can. If there's ever a time when you can't afford an editor, there are a ton of great resources out there on self-editing for writers. A couple of people shared a couple of pieces of advice which are fantastic. But there's also not necessarily for like TRPG writing specifically, but there's just a lot of stuff out there for writers, usually like self-publishing writers, things like that. And it's specifically about how writers can start learning self-editing. And if you can't hire an editor, I would say at least try to find stuff like that, because you can find a lot of those resources for free. So check that stuff out if you can.
Absolutely. Wonderful advice. How about for you?
I would say if you want to start writing community content, don't hesitate to reach out to the community if you have any questions or if you need help on a certain topic. For example, if you don't know how to do layout because you don't have InDesign, you may find someone maybe who can do it for you, and maybe then you can exchange services. I know, for example, Fran and Sarah did some editing for me, and I did some layout for them. That's kind of exchange of services that can be very helpful to get you started and polish your product in an area where you are not really comfortable.
Absolutely. And to I'm glad you brought that up. And to piggyback on that a little bit too, the community content programs give you complete control over your portion of the profit, right? So different programs have different rates. Ours are all a 50-50 split. 50% goes to the creator, and the other 50% is divvied up between Onyx Path and Drive-Thru. That creator 50% you can break down, right? So maybe you can't afford to pay an editor a word rate, but you can say, I'll give you 15% of this to edit my, of whatever it makes to edit it. And if they're amicable to that, that's cool, right? I have repeatedly and still will if time, if I ever have time, if somebody hits me up and they're like, hey, can you lay out this 10-page book for 5%? I will do those things when I have the time to do them. The time I have available to do that is less than it used to be, but I still do it from time to time. I just put one up a couple weeks ago for that I just did a layout for somebody for 5%. So those are options that are available to you as well. And then how about you, Mike? Any final thought, last thing that you want to give to the folks that might be approaching starting out in this, or maybe just start diving into using it even?
talking about Adobe programs.
Oh, no, talk about it just in community
Okay.
content in general. So getting started with community content or starting to use it in their own games, like at their table even.
Oh yeah. What's it? There's always a need for something out there because Lord knows we can't cover everything. We try to, but there's going to be giant gaps of stuff like city source books. NPCs and encounters are a huge thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are the kinds of things that, frankly, it often doesn't make as much sense for the company to dump a bunch of money and resources into, but it makes a lot of sense for a community content creator to do, because you're not ramping up that level of overhead. You know, it's a lot easier for a community content creator to make a 100-page PDF about Milwaukee than it is for us to do it. You know, just because you don't have the same roadblocks, you're not dealing with the same costs, the same, um, roadblocks, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, there's so you can do a two like well, for example, like prestige classes in D&D. I remember when was it oh whatever Adventurers Guild order went up.
Mm-hmm.
First batch of stuff I saw was about a gajillion 2-page PDFs of prestige classes, because they didn't have them in the books yet, and there's a gap, there was a need there, just something that WotC couldn't do anything for yet. And again, we fall in the same way. Basically, there's always going to be gaps of stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Watch for the gap. That's just a general design philosophy that I have, whether I'm doing something for community content or something, for a professional writing job. I look for places where there's holes and hooks. What hasn't been defined yet, and where can I get at it? Things like that. So I think that's very good advice. Thank you, Mike. The only other thing I would like to say, in terms of from an audience perspective, if you're pursuing this stuff, let's say you're a big fan of Trinity Continuum, and while we have been putting out a lot of material, maybe we're not quite getting out what you like, or what you feel you need for your table, or things that might make your day easier. Checking out the Storypath Nexus gives you an opportunity to pick up those things that are in those gaps. And it's a community that I think it's fair to say, with all three of our community content programs, but especially with Storypath Nexus, the creators talk to one another. They share notes. They share feedback. We look at reviews. I mean, that information. So it's somewhat peer reviewed, if not the official material, right? So I think there's a good chance that you're going to find something you enjoy. You're going to find something that's going to add value to your table, or if nothing else, provide a skeleton that then you can work into the thing that's missing. So I would highly encourage you to check those things out on the Nexus, on the Slurration Vault, and on Canis Minor. And I would not be doing my duty if I didn't also remind you, as much as leaving reviews and ratings is extremely helpful for community content creators so that they get better at what they do, and so that other customers can see the things they need, it's equally important to leave those for us, for the Onyx Path stuff, for the official releases. I don't know that there's a tool in our kit that is better at getting the word out about our product than a 5-star rating with a thoughtful review on DriveThruRPG. Those, I cannot overstate how important those are. So please, if you've picked up something from us, doesn't matter what, doesn't matter how long ago. If you have, an old PDF that's been sitting in your library for 10 years, or if you picked up the Curseborn Ashcan this weekend, especially if you picked up the Curseborn Ashcan this weekend, go and leave us a rating and a review. Even just dropping stars and, hey, this was neat, highly recommend. Bang, you're done, and you have done a good service for all of us. Folks, that is bringing us up to the end of our time. So I'm going to let everybody go ahead and tell us one last time who you are, what you do, your pronouns, and anything you would care to promote. And let's start off this time with Jess, please, your details.
Yeah, I'm Jess, they, them. You can find all of my writing and editing, all the stuff that I do on my website, writejess.com, and that's WRITEJESS.com. You can see all the stuff I've worked on for like Lands and Pugmire, all of that on there, as well as all the other stuff that I've worked on. So feel free to check that out.
Excellent.
Thanks, Travis.
Thank you so much for being here. Always a pleasure to hang out. Alon, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm Alain, he, him. You will find a lot of my work on the Slash and Vault and a bit on Canis Minor and StoryPass Nexus on Drive-Thru RPG. And you can contact me on the Onyx Pass Discord channels, notably in the community content specific discussions.
And your username on there is just your name, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's as I thought. And I'll go ahead and throw a link to the Discord in there as well, so folks can head over there if you haven't already. Last but never least, Mr. Cheney, sir, what do you got?
Well, I'm Mike. My pronouns are he, him, and while I don't have a website or anything fun like that, we do have the Onyx Path drive-through pages.
Yes.
I'm involved on some things. It's some in one way or the other.
Yeah, I don't believe. I think it's fair to say that nothing winds up going out the door that doesn't pass through Mike's hands. So
Yeah, I either buy the art or buy the art and lay it out, or one of the variations about all.
well, I don't think that the public gets the opportunity to tell you this enough, Mike, but you do a fucking fantastic job. It's a pleasure and an honor to work with you. And thank you for making the books look so badass.
Oh, you did a really good job on Scion God.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Hopefully everyone will be able to see soon.
Yeah, one day. One day we'll
Everybody got to
out.
see Dixie's handiwork there on the Curseborn brochure, or not brochure, the ash can.
Yes, yeah, big shout out to Dixie. That ash can looks awesome. Looks beautiful. I know we're at the end of time, but I just want to leave you with this thought. It's very difficult to make something so quote unquote simple look so good, right? Because there's not a lot going on that ash can, but it looks really pretty. So kudos to Dixie for that layout. All right, y'all. We're going to wrap this up. Please be back here in about 29 minutes time for the closing ceremonies. Can you believe it? We're already at the end of the road. Till then, get your shots, wash your hands, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.